Hello, I'm Jack, and I'm here with Luka and Kellan. The poem we will be discussing is called What's Left by Clint Smith. Now, I feel a personal connection to the story of this poem because of my experience with loss. Specifically, back in 2021, I lost my family's cabin in Lake Tahoe to a forest fire. A piece of me that was there for all my life was suddenly gone, and it brought along with it a whole lot of inner conflict. My stream of consciousness very much mimicked the writing and inner conflict presented in this poem, written by Smith after his home was destroyed in Hurricane Katrina. Although my circumstances were not as extreme as Clint's, this poem still brought me back to those times when I was mourning and fighting with myself to cope with the loss. That makes a great piece of writing, in my opinion, something that takes you to a very specific emotional state, something that affects you. That is what What's Left has managed to accomplish. What's Left by Clint Smith. How warm did the water have to be before it gave the sky permission to crumble? When the levees broke open, did the ocean intend to swallow the city or find refuge inside of it? Is it wrong to love something more after it has already disappeared? Is it still called disappearing if no one knew you were there? The scientist tells me that we have been disappearing for a long time now. The evangelist tells me this is what happens when you make a mockery of time. The television tells me this is really the best thing that could have happened to a burning city. My mother was born in a city that is asking how this happened. I was born in a city that knows how this happened. I was born in the same city as my mother. I was born in this city, which I am told makes it mine. My father was not born in this city, but has lived here longer than I have been alive. Can you claim something as your own if you don't remember how you found it? I come from a city that is drowning, while being told it is rinsing itself clean.
Luka here, and I found this poem interesting for quite a few reasons, but just in terms of the way it's written. I really liked how Smith uses repeated rhetorical questions at the beginning of the poem to draw attention to the cultural relevance of Hurricane Katrina as something that could have been avoided if more attention had been paid to the well-being of New Orleans, but destroyed thousands of lives. He asks, for example, how warm the water in the harbor had to have been for the hurricane to have occurred, and this really makes the reader realize that the hurricane was not just some random act of chaos, but that extreme neglect towards keeping the city environmentally and infrastructurally safe was what made it so dangerous. On top of this, the other big questions he asks, to the tune of whether it's acceptable to love something that's gone, reinforces the grief dripping from the words with the structural addition making it clear how dear he held the city. And on a more personal note, I like the poem because it has quite a few different meanings and, as I mentioned previously, acts as a response towards the neglect towards New Orleans. I already explained how the question about how warm the water was acts as a subtle critique of the lack of infrastructural help to the city from the government, but Smith also criticizes everyone from scientists who blamed citizens for not solving their own impossible problems, and televangelists who said that the hurricane was divine retribution. There's also something to be said about the fact that Smith is a black man who grew up in a city with a large black population, and because many underestimated the utter devastation that the hurricane had on black communities, another thing touched on in the text, and the poor government response to the crisis is sometimes suspected to be racially motivated, I think that it's possible for someone who similarly grew up as part of a marginalized community and was affected by welfare programs for this reason may think that the poem was in a way subtextually criticizing these manners of thinking and of action. The most personal reaction I had myself was unmotivated by my family history, as Smith's longing for his own home and lingering grief at its destruction reminded me of the fact that my grandparents still regret the loss of their homeland in Yugoslavia and have told me how the NATO troops sent in to do battle in it didn't really seem to care about the safety of them and their people or their homes.
Hello, I'm Kellan. Clint Smith was born in New Orleans on August 25, 1988. Raised in New Orleans as well, his family had strong ties to the area, having a family home which they had lived in for generations. Forced to flee to Texas when his family home was submerged by Hurricane Katrina in 2005, he was driven to a deep depression by this tragedy, and he longed for a way to express this deep sadness within him. This eventually drove him to writing the poem, What Is Left, showing a longing for his home and aspects of said depression. Within the poem, lines such as, "Is it wrong to love something more after it has already disappeared?" and "My mother was born in a city that is asking how this happened. I was born in a city that knows how this happened. I was born in the same city as my mother. I was born in the city, which I am told makes it mine. My father was not born in this city, but has lived here longer than I have been alive. With these lines, he's expressing the deep emotional connection that he had to his home and that his family had and the memories they had made there. He's showing the history of his family and his relation to the city and how even though he had loved it, now that it's gone, he has this deep pain and grief within him because it feels like part of him has been taken away from him, something so integral to his and his family's history.
Credits.
This poem has been published by the American Poetry Review, the Poetry Society of America, and Clint Smith's own book, Counting Descent. This podcast was made using the tools available on Soundtrap. Music was provided via the Stardew Valley soundtrack by Concerned Ape. Research was conducted via Clint Smith's website, clintsmithhigh.com. That's clintsmithhii.com, as well as poetrysociety.org. Thank you.